During COVID-19, many of us were put through the most extreme situations. As we approach a post-COVID America, we come to appreciate those who have sacrificed most. Our frontline workers, who have sacrificed their mental health, watching people die on hospital beds every day. Our teachers, who sacrificed their safety coming into work every day to make sure that they could keep their jobs to support their families and their students in the classroom. Because while they are our heroes, they've also been made victims, which is what brings us to our quote today by Nora Ephron: above all, be the heroine of your life, not the victim. Because as true as the quote is, as we recognize our heroes, we can only appreciate their full servitude if we understand their positions as victims. And that's true not just in a COVID-19 world, but no matter where we look in time. This can be examined through, first, Thomas Shelby in the fictional Peaky Blinders following the very real World War I. Second, Martin Luther King Jr. during the Civil Rights Movement, or from the 1970s today in this modern era with Norman Borlaug. Because first, we look in the fictional world of Thomas Shelby and Peaky Blinders, a TV show based in a post-World War I era in the UK. But regardless of whether or not it's fictional, the story it tells is very true. We see the idea of Thomas Shelby, a man who came back from World War I fighting in the war, ready to give back to the people. And that's where he joins Parliament. And after he's joined Parliament, he fights for the people and those of soldiers who came back, who don't have the emotional support they need after the trauma of war or the jobs they need to keep supporting their families. But he fights in Parliament every day. But we can't fully appreciate his servitude until we understand where he's come from. He was a soldier during World War I, so he comes back, and we see in the TV show that now he's unable to sleep at night. He has very severe PTSD, but we can't appreciate his full servitude until we see that while he was fighting during the day for the people, he was still sacrificing so much, because at night he was still suffering and went very many nights without sleep. That's where we understand his full servitude was giving up all the time he had to possibly save himself in order to save the people of his land. But second, we move a little later down the timeline to Martin Luther King Jr. during the Civil Rights Movement, because while still today we call him one of the greatest heroes of all time, we recognize his work was so imperative to the Civil Rights Movement, but we don't understand how big it was until we understand his position as a victim. Because not only was he assassinated, but he was unjustly put in prison as well. In fact, one of the most well-known documents that we still read in classrooms today is a letter from Birmingham jail, where he was unjustly put in prison, where he wrote this letter. Where then, he could have ended his movement in the civil rights then itself. He could have ended his timeline and moved on, and went on to save his own life and help his own family. But instead, he continued to sacrifice, and he was put in this position as a victim, unjustly put in prison, where he still sacrificed in order to help the people. But we even come to today, of Norman Borlaug, who died in just 2009, where after during the 1970s winning a Nobel Prize, that's where he came to save the world, where his position as a hero, where he found a new type of wheat, where had that not been found, it was predicted that most of the Indian subcontinent, over 1 billion people, would have been dead by the 1980s. That's where his invention was able to save them, a new type of wheat, where India was overrun by famine, was able to be grown despite any environment they were put in. But that's where we understand his position as a victim. He was growing up in extreme conditions, where his family struggled to feed themselves. But that's why he had to work on a farm every day, where most children are never put in this position. He was a victim, but his position as a victim is what drove him to make sure that people in the future could continue to fill the stomachs of their families. That's where he wasn't just a hero, but a victim, and his position as a victim is what drove him to do the greatest thing he could for the Indian subcontinent today. That no matter where we look in time, whether it be with Thomas Shelby post-World War I, MLK Jr. during the Civil Rights Movement, or Norman Borlaug in this modern era, they are so imperative to understanding that as victims, they first and foremost were victims before they were heroes. But that's where, regardless of how much they could have profited, they continued to give up what they could to help the people. And that's where we come back to post-COVID world, where we thank those who have given up the most. We know you aren't just heroes, and we hear you as victims, and hopefully we come to then thank them in the future and do as much as we can to rebuild this community.